94. By the way, this is recorded on Thursday, the 24th of September, and you can see the timeline here at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. When you're watching these tropical updates, always make sure you're checking the time date stamp, whether it's on your Plus app and or you're watching it here on your phone. Just look for the date. So once again, this is Thursday, September 24th. All right, so how will Humberto have an effect on what is trying to develop here around Hispaniola and the Bahamas and potentially having an impact back at home? It's going to have an impact because now the models are bringing Humberto to what could be another major hurricane. Category 3 here starting Sunday into Monday and Tuesday. And the timeline and the dates here are important because what we're talking about is a very slow moving storm. Northwest right now at 8 miles an hour. It's undercutting the forward speed from the previous models, and it's also overshooting the intensity here as it builds into that category 3 from what is still a tropical storm as it moves through the open water. The best news with this storm here is that it does stay away from land, aside from what will be another wave generator here for our beaches, especially as it starts to lift to the north. And it's also well outside of Bermuda, so this would be similar to a path that we saw with Hurricane Aaron when it went through. But between Humberto and the Bahamas and Florida and the southeast coast is invest number 94. This has garnered most of the email and the question, hey, what's going on with this system? The one that I said from the very beginning, we need to keep an eye on this one here because there are some things that could have big influences. Our frontal boundary isn't going to be as strong as it once was, where this was coming off showing more of a stronger cold front, more of a trophy kind of line here, so a little bit weaker. And if you notice where it starts to break here by the time we get to the Carolinas and northward, that could be a weak spot in the front. And as Hurricane Humberto intensifies to a category 3, what we could see here would be some pushing and shoving. So this is Humberto. We've got the fanning off of the top, easily starting to see some of the rotation. But here with our invest, even though the potential continues to show and the percentages are moving up here as we make our way through the week, what we're seeing here overall, let me see if I can bring up my toolbar here, we're not seeing as much of the fanning off the top. If there was a center of rotation, I would put it right around there at the Dominican Republic. But what we're still seeing here are a lot of the winds that are inbound and then very slowly starting to see what will begin that formation of a low pressure area as it's coming out of these clouds. So let me put that into play here and I'll show you what we're talking about. And there's the clouds. Notice that these are moving from the west to the east, and this is that slow movement here. Notice it's coming in from the subpart of the tropics there. That's part of that low level flow. But overall, if you watch where the thunderstorms cluster to develop, it's going to be in and around the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic and the 700 isles here that make up a lot of the Caribbean isles are still going to have a disruptive effect here on what is trying to become Tropical Storm Imelda. And then with all of that going on, we're sitting over what will still be some pretty intensely warm water. Notice that this is Cuba, so this is showing landmass. But if we go just outside of Cuba into these, oh, that's the wrong one there, Richard, go into these areas of orange where development is likely, you can see that all of that leading the way, that's bathtub hot water here. So basically the fuel for what is invest number 94 to continue to lift to the north. So here's how Humberto could have an effect on what will become hurricane or potentially tropical storm and then Hurricane Imelda. This is Sunday, folks, or Saturday evening rather, and right now we're showing fully closed circulation. So at this point, it is possible that we have a tropical storm that is already taken shape on Saturday. This is in the southern part of the Bahamas here. Let me let this go a little bit more to the north and we'll stop it again. But this is going to continue a path here as it trails off and starts to move to the north with a little bit of a northeasterly push. And the reason is that Humberto is still going to be making that same run here, coming in on the inside of Bermuda. These two are pretty close together, so it's like the idea of trying to squeeze magnets together. Some of the force, the mechanisms here, even though Humberto is intensifying, the distance between the two is going to be great enough that it's not going to have much of an effect on the overall wind pattern here for what is trying to develop. Yesterday, it was looking like, because Humberto was going to be intensifying, that it would start to disrupt some of what is invest number 94. But the problem is Humberto is still far to the south, whereas yesterday they had it more to the north where that proximity would have been closed in, and then it could have been a disruption. So let me cover this. I've had the question again, will these storms combine or merge to make a stronger storm? That doesn't happen. They actually repel each other like the magnets that we're talking about, and if anything, one would cause a little bit of a almost like when planets start to rotate around each other. So once Humberto starts to make that northwesterly turn, it'll actually help to create a void, a little weakness here, path of least resistance, where what we could see is that the storm actually comes up, does a little loop-to-loop, and then would follow Humberto back out into the Atlantic. That timing is very tight, and it looks like that too is starting to close out. So that leads us into the spaghetti models, which, and that's what we're talking about here, anywhere from around Savannah up through Beaufort, even into Charleston here for the Carolinas. And there are some models that try to bring it in around Brunswick, Darien, and then in through coastal southeast Georgia and into areas around the Carolinas. So obviously the Euro, the GFS rather, in white, the Euro here in yellow, the GFS is making a run into the Carolinas, whereas the Euro rather, look how it hits the brakes here, and then what we're going to see is that expansion of this big blob, and that would be what I was talking about with that little loop, and then trying to follow, there you go, follow the GFS as it moves away from Bermuda. If it did that little loop-to-loop and it sat here, that could be a big rainmaker here, of course, for coastal zones of the Carolinas as well as Georgia. And for our impact, it's going to be on the weaker side of the storm, the sinking air side of the storm, and it would be similar to what we've seen over the last several nor'easter type of events, with once again the beaches bearing the brunt of the wave and the wind impact, like what we've seen here with those nor'easters. So here's where Humberto sits right now, and I put that into play, and you can see that as far as the shear, there's a little bit that continues here around our tropical storm. One of the reasons that we're going to see, one, the slow growth, and two, the slower forward speed, whereas the lack of shear is to the south, and as the low pressure area here lifts away from the Dominican Republic and into the Bahamas, you can see that there's a large void as we move into Friday with no shear for the continuation of development, which would then, as it starts to encounter a little bit of shear, this is that bumper in that low pressure area becoming somewhat stationary that would allow that void in between, so that it's possible that it will basically blast right through the frontal boundary and then into the Carolinas. There's a lot of switching that is going to go on here. All right, so this is Hurricane Humberto. Obviously, we're seeing the models here where you've got the Hurricane Center going with what will be that Category 3 following the National Hurricane Center line. This is the one in blue. So it shows us as we get to 72, 96 hours and beyond that it's still a major hurricane. Using the same intensity here, this is invest number 94, you can see that the early model runs, because of the shear that's going to be in the way, the 700 islands that we spoke of, that it holds it closer, and this is the model on some here, that it holds it closer to what will be tropical storm strength. Now you might be looking at this and saying, hey, where's the blue line from the National Hurricane Center? That will pop up once there is an actual forecast, a storm cone, and a National Hurricane Center path that will at that point have to be a name or a number. So we'll have to wait till potentially Saturday, if not Sunday, for that to happen. But here are the spaghetti models. And yeah, it's pretty much a mess. This is all based on the GFS, by the way. Both models, the Euro and the GFS, have continued to lean to the west. There's a lot more activity now over the Bahamas as it leaves areas around the Dominican Republic and moves northward here. And you can see where some of the models even try to bring it into areas of Florida, but we're using the guidance track. So the guidance track basically of all of the model runs, which scenario seems more likely based on the strengthening of Humberto out over the Atlantic and that weakening frontal boundary that will be coming out of coming out of the northwest here and into the southeast as we make our way through Friday and Saturday. So like I was saying, the inclement weather that we're going to see as that frontal boundary comes through, increasing rain chances Friday and Saturday. Keep in mind that that barrier, that frontal boundary, is acting as a bumper to helping to redirect. But if you notice the way that I drew that line here and made the little loop-de-loop, this is that similar path that we're seeing with my drawing to what is in the intensity forecast here for the model data. Now I'll let this play out here through the rest of the weekend, and this is where the rest of the spaghetti plots come in. So I'm using the GFS. The Euro has been a bit more accurate, but as far as the Euro ensemble, it's as messy as the GFS. It's just much more broad spread, and it doesn't have the main intensity line. So what we're not seeing is the overall path, but I think we can get a better idea here if we just take the collection, and we'll go to the models that are following similar to our path here for the GFS, and you can see what I was saying there, anywhere from around Savannah, we got Charleston, Beaufort, and then even up into Wilmington here, with some of the odd models out trying to make a long scraping approach along the area beaches. This is the consensus. Once again, this is the models that seem to make a bit more sense. And I will say that offline, I've been doing a lot of exploration with some of the AI models. Google has one out for the tropics, and it also is following a very similar path here to what we're seeing with both the GFS and the Euro. So with that said, the GFS model continues to show what will be an approach close to and in between. It will be a closer approach than what we saw with Aaron, and the distance between these is going to be key to that impact. Of course, a closer storm, and we're not just on the sinking side of the storm. We could be close enough, especially here in our coastal zones, that would have more of an impact that would be tropical in nature. The stronger side would still be out over the water, a little bit more distance as it draws away here with Humberto. Then that is going to lessen our impact as far as the wind and the tropical weather, but we're still going to have the impact felt along the beaches as the waves will continue to come in. All right, I'm going to leave this here as we wrap up our tropics. Temperatures are cooking. They're going to be warm here through Friday's forecast, with those daytime highs staying in the 90s above our seasonal trend. They will start to come down, and that's as the rain chances go up. So the tropics, the rain that we're going to have this weekend, it might be a nuisance as the front's coming through. If you've got any kind of plans for Friday and or Saturday, those are not going to be tropical. And just remember that bumper, that frontal boundary, is going to be coming through and hopefully helping to redirect. And of course, we'd like to see it stronger and really come offshore here and redirect it so everybody stays out of the tropics. But as you can see, our spaghetti plots continue to shift to the west, and now putting anywhere between parts of the Georgia coast and all the way into the Carolinas into what I would say is watch mode. Based on these, if I lived anywhere in that area, I'd be thinking about my hurricane plans and my kits and just getting stuff ready, because what we're talking about, let me go all the way back to the beginning here, is Sunday into the Bahamas. Monday, this will be moving along the Florida East Coast, and by Monday evening into Tuesday, this thing is going to be, and that's based on our current timing here, and it's going to be basically lateral to our area as it continues to develop, moving through the Bahamas and potentially strengthening with those percentages now up to an 80 and a 90% chance. That's your Weather Authority tropical update for Thursday, September 24th. This was recorded at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Look for more of these updates on your app and on the Plus.